If you have oily skin and you find yourself buying the wrong sunscreen over and over and over again, this video is for you. Hey everyone, so nice to see you again. My name is Bella and today we're gonna talk about a very important topic, which is how to pick a sunscreen for oily skin. Choosing a sunscreen that suits your skin type can be a very arduous process, but it doesn't have to be. The goal of this video is to simplify that process for you even just a bit. Without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get into specifics, let's establish a few baseline properties that you should look for in any sunscreen. At the very least, the sunscreen in question should be SPF 30 broad spectrum, and the rest is up to your personal preference. The finish, texture, and budget should all be to your liking. Because at the end of the day, if it's a sunscreen that doesn't suit your needs and preferences, you might not use it. And the sunscreen will only work when you use it every day. With that out of the way, let's get into specifics. So whenever we talk about sunscreen on this channel, I want us to be able to understand each other. And I want us to use language that you will find easy to understand. And I thought, what better way to do that than to establish some sunscreen categories. So from here on out, we're going to talk about sunscreens in the following ways. In terms of UV filters, in terms of formula, and in terms of finish. Whenever we talk about sunscreens in terms of UV filters, there are usually three terms that are used. We have chemical or organic sunscreens, physical, inorganic, or mineral sunscreens, and then we have hybrid sunscreens, which are a combination of the two. Moving on to sunscreen formulas. As you guys can see, there are so many different types of formulas available on the market. But before you get overwhelmed, let me just say this. There are certain formulas that are better suited to oily skin. The list I have here is neither scientific nor exhaustive, but at least we now have a common language whenever we talk about different sunscreen formulas. Last but not least, we have different kinds of sunscreen finishes. We have glowy sunscreens, we have demi-matte or natural sunscreens, and we have matte sunscreens. Now that we've established a common language for talking about sunscreens, we can now move on to the meat of this video, which is where I give you guys tips on what to look out for when buying a sunscreen for oily skin. Let's start with UV filters. This is usually based on preference or skin tone. Luckily, oily skin tends to be more resilient, so it can tolerate most UV filters. If you see zinc oxide, that is very friendly for oily skin because zinc oxide, as it turns out, is a mild astringent, meaning it has oil controlling properties. So a sunscreen with zinc oxide will likely be mattifying. So if white cast isn't an issue, you can look for a mineral or hybrid sunscreen that features zinc oxide. But if you don't want to have a white cast in your sunscreen, I suggest going for a chemical one. Now let's move on to formula, which is my favorite one. Usually people with oily skin tend to look for a lightweight sunscreen that doesn't have heavy emollients and is non-sticky. The sunscreen formulas that usually meet these standards are the silicone-based sunscreens, gel-type sunscreens, foam or mousse-type sunscreens, and serum-type sunscreens. Admittedly, foam and mousse-type sunscreens are not very popular in the Philippines, so you might find it difficult to find one locally. Again, this is not a scientific way of categorizing sunscreens, so there will be exceptions to these categories. I wouldn't normally recommend a milky type sunscreen to someone with oily skin because these tend to be greasy. I also wouldn't normally recommend a lotion or cream type unless you skip moisturizer when using those kinds of sunscreens because again, it can be glowy or greasy. As a bonus, you can also look for sunscreens that are non-comedogenic or oil-free. As someone with combination skin, there are certain ingredients that I avoid because I find that they are too heavy for my skin and have caused breakouts in the past. They are cyclopentasiloxane, especially if it's the first ingredient, mineral oil, and coconut oil. So if you're like me and these ingredients have caused breakouts for you in the past, I would suggest avoiding them, especially in your sunscreen. And finally, we have finish. Again, this is usually up to personal preference because I know some people with oily skin who still like glowy sunscreens. But again, usually most people with oily skin want a mattifying or a natural finish sunscreen. The keywords to look out for are mattifying, oil absorbing, non-greasy, non-oily, and lightweight. Usually sunscreens with these characteristics will be well suited for oily skin. But then again, this isn't completely foolproof because the finish may change depending on what you layer under underneath the sunscreen, and you often have to try the product in order to get a better feel for the finish.
In other words, these are just guidelines.
In my mind, that's basically all you need to know when shopping for a sunscreen for oily skin. If there's anything you think I missed, please comment down below. It will help the community if you do. Don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel out. And if you're looking for specific sunscreen recommendations for oily skin, don't worry, I got you. That's going to be my next video, so don't miss it. Thank you again for watching. I really appreciate you. And I'll see you in my next video. Bye!